Labour claim they've hung on, and there's triumph for the SNP as the people deliver their verdict on politicians in elections across the UK. The SNP have won a third term in Scotland, though are just short of an overall majority. The Conservatives celebrate unexpected success in Scotland. Labour crash into third place. In England, Labour failed to make any headway, though it held on to most of its seats.
We were getting predictions that Labour was going to lose councils. We didn't. We hung on and we grew support in a lot of places.
But in London, the Labour candidate is on course to beat his Conservative rival to become the capital's first Muslim mayor. We'll be looking at the latest results across the UK and where they've left the political parties. Also tonight, the government climbs down from its controversial plans to force all schools in England to become academies. Escaping the wildfires burning out of control in Canada, some fled in their cars, others have to be airlifted out. And voyage to the bottom of the sea, the new discoveries lighting up the deepest and darkest place on Earth.
And coming up in Sports Day on BBC News, Andy Murray beats Thomas Berdych in the quarters of the Madrid Masters to set up a semi-final with Rafael Nadal.
Good evening. It's been the biggest test of political opinion since the general election, and the national and local polls have delivered some surprising results. The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, said his party had hung on, but its share of the vote collapsed in its former heartland of Scotland, where the SNP won a third term in government, though without an overall majority. A resurgent Scottish Conservative Party unexpectedly beat Labour into third place. It looks like there'll be better news for Labour in London, where the party's candidate Sadiq Khan is forecast to defeat his Conservative rival, Zac Goldsmith. In the big test across England's councils, there was little change. Both main parties lost some seats. And while Labour has the most councillors, it wasn't enough to silence some MPs' criticism of their leader. In Wales, Labour remain in government, but the most notable change was for UKIP, which gained its first seats in the Welsh Assembly. Our political editor Laura Koonsberg now, on a day that's raised big questions for all the parties. Her report contains some flash photography.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. Nicola Sturgeon reigns still in Scotland. Yes! Tory divisions don't seem to trouble their vote too much. And Labour clings on, maybe inching forwards when they need to move miles.
All across England last night, we were getting predictions that Labour was going to lose councils. We didn't. We hung on and we grew support in a lot of places because our party is standing up for the steel industry, standing up against the cuts in disability payments made by this government, standing up against the grotesque levels of inequality in Britain. That is the Labour message.
Notice he said hung on, not won. But it's almost impossible for him to win the country with this. Joanne, Labour lost for words in Scotland. Heartbreak as they're pushed to third in what was home.
10,300.
The unthinkable happened. You won't have seen a Tory grin like this here for decades. The Conservatives in second place.
I promise that I will serve to the very best of my ability. It's a role that I take seriously.
And the SNP with a touch fewer seats, but very much in charge.
We are the very first party in the era of devolution to poll more than 1 million votes in constituencies across our country. The result of the election was emphatic. The people of Scotland once again placed their trust in the SNP to govern our country. We won a clear and unequivocal mandate.
For the Westminster Government's party, a few sweaty and awkward moments. But despite the Tories' splits and spats over Europe, they slipped rather than sank. Enough for the Prime Minister to be able to keep his bounce.
6 years into government. Of course, we don't get everything right. Of course, we can make mistakes. Of course, sometimes things go wrong. But people, I think, look at the big picture and they want us to go on delivering what we promised in our manifesto.
But Labour dug in to keep all but one of its councils, surprising themselves perhaps. In areas in the south and around England where they'd feared they'd lose vital ground. The challenge, though, as many of the party's members and MPs know all too well, they have to show they can take back territory, not just hold on. But in London, Labour's Sadiq Khan is on his way to do just that, on track to snatch City Hall from the Conservatives' Zac Goldsmith.
Let's wait and see the results.
A big win for Labour, but a powerful purge for a man who's avoided Jeremy Corbyn at all costs. The Lib Dem leader, though, rushed to his party's pockets of success.
Bloody superstar, well done, well done.
The start of a comeback? Maybe. Even these baby steps are worth popping a cork or two.
Last year we had a terrible result, and the result of that outcome was that we decided to roll our sleeves up and to fight back, and we've done that with that kind of traditional British gusto.
I think Neil might have deserved a glass as well.
Absolutely, breakfast.
And champagne for breakfast? Why not if you're UKIP with new seats in Wales with old faces? They squeezed Labour and the Tories almost everywhere, but their success was most marked in Cardiff, where Labour held on to power, but there was pain and surprise as one of the Welsh valleys fell to the Plaid Cymru leader.
A new dawn is about to break in Wales. Here in the Rhondda, a new dawn has already broken over the valleys.
There are layer upon layer upon layer of results. But underneath all that, at the core, there was most pressure on Jeremy Corbyn. Labour has avoided a disaster, and on one measure they're even ahead of the Conservatives. But this is not a good set of results for the party. If they've to have a real shot at returning to power, they need to be piling on hundreds and hundreds of seats in elections like this. These results are nowhere near.
It's not just Jeremy Corbyn's enemies, though, who are warning the party to tread carefully. Tonight, one of his powerful union backers put him and his critics on notice.
We are at the stage when we should be winning hundreds of seats. But I don't think that's just about Corbyn, you know. People won't vote for a divided Labour Party. And therefore, those on the right of the party, or place them where you like, who are pushing against Corbyn, I don't think they're doing themselves a service, they're certainly not doing the party a service, and most importantly of all, from the GMB union's perspective, they're not doing working people a service at all. It's about time they rallied behind Corbyn, and let's give it a go. Let's give it a go for a year or so. Who knows what might happen?
We do very nearly know that these boxes contain a Labour victory in London, an important victory for the party. But politics isn't just about piling up votes where you know you can win, but persuading others where you don't yet dare. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Westminster.
Well, as we heard there, it was a good night for the SNP in Scotland, with the third term as the largest party. They won 63 of 129 seats in the Holyrood Parliament, just 2 short of an overall majority. The Conservatives are celebrating, coming second with 31, a gain of 16 seats, far more than many had expected. Labour, for so long the dominant force in Scotland, were left in third place after they lost 13 seats. Our Scotland editor Sarah Smith is at Holyrood for us now. Sarah, what's your assessment of the result?
We learned something very important about Scottish politics last night, Fiona. We learned that nearly 2 years after the referendum, it's still all about independence. The parties argued about tax, about health, about education, but still, mostly, yes voters voted for the SNP, returning them to government, and in very large numbers, no voters voted for the Tories, who had campaigned saying they were the true defenders of the Union. And it was the Tories who delivered a real shock to the Scottish political system.
Good morning, it's 6 o'clock, it's Friday morning. Welcome to a special election edition of Good Morning Scotland.
Labour have a dreadful night.
And Ruth Davidson's Conservatives look like they'll be the new official opposition in the Scottish Parliament.
Scots awoke this morning to news many thought they would never hear. Labour, once so dominant, beaten into third place by the Tories. Ruth Davidson, the Scottish Tory leader, barely mentioned in her campaign that she is a Conservative, promising simply to stand up to the SNP and against a second independence referendum.
I know that there are thousands of people that voted for me and my team last night who aren't natural Conservatives, and they're probably quite surprised that they found themselves even considering voting Conservative. But they did because they wanted me to do a specific job for them. They wanted somebody to stand up to the SNP and say, you cannot ignore our voice, you cannot ignore the decision that we made as a country and try and drag us back to a second referendum.
Ruth Davidson is certainly not your average Tory. A working-class, kickboxing, openly gay woman, always game for a good photo op. She can talk to voters other Conservatives simply cannot reach.
Scotland Street now has a Tory MSP for the first time. It's just one of their remarkable gains across Scotland. How much of a surprise is this? Well, just a couple of days ago, Ruth Davidson, who won this constituency, told me she didn't think she had a chance of taking it.
But the voters in Edinburgh Central responded to a very effective campaign.
I think Ruth Davidson went out the last few months really campaigning, really going for the fact that they could do a good opposition. And I think whoever came up with that strategy really hit the nail on the head.
And what happens to Labour now? What could they say, do you think, to recover in Scotland?
Oh, I don't know what happens with Labour. Traditionally, it always used to be Labour everywhere in Scotland, you know, and it's just funny now that they just don't seem to have anything to say.
What can the Scottish Labour leader say about being bludgeoned into third place?
How do you explain Labour's losses last night?
Well, what we saw in Scotland last night was the referendum arguments of the past being rerun again. So strong support for the SNP from those people that had voted yes and cities that had voted yes, and strong support for the Tories in areas that were very dominantly no. That's to my deep regret, because I thought Scotland might be interested in moving on from those arguments of the past, and that's not happened overnight.
If Scottish voters don't move on, Labour will struggle to find a purpose in these new politics. Whilst Nicola Sturgeon's SNP increased their vote, denied an overall majority but ready to rule and still dreaming of an independent Scotland. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Edinburgh.
Labour have claimed victory in the London mayoral election, with Sadiq Khan looking set to end 8 years of Conservative rule under Boris Johnson. The count's still going on at London City Hall, where Sadiq Khan is well ahead of his Conservative rival Zac Goldsmith. If his victory is confirmed, he'll be the capital's first Muslim mayor. Well, let's talk to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's at City Hall. So, John, the official result isn't yet in, but the Labour man looks set to win.
Yes, there's been a technical hold-up in the counting, but there's no doubt about the eventual result. Sadiq Khan will be declared London's new Labour mayor, and he will be celebrating what he sees as a very personal victory after what has been a very personal and often rather ugly campaign. Why do I say ugly? Well, Zac Goldsmith, his Conservative opponent, backed up by David Cameron, has worked very hard to accuse Sadiq Khan of sharing platform with Islamic extremists and the like, even though there is no suggestion that Sadiq Khan is any kind of extremist himself. There has been quite a backlash. It has been condemned by Baroness Varsi, the Muslim peer who was a former chair of the Tory party, condemned by Zac Goldsmith's own sister, Jemima Khan, and also by Steve Hilton, a former advisor and close friend of David Cameron himself, in an interview for BBC Newsnight. A significant win for Sadiq Khan and for Labour is now going to leave a rather bitter aftertaste.
And what does this win, eventually to be confirmed, what does it mean for Labour?
Well, after the win that, as you say, is about to be confirmed in another couple of hours or so, well, those Labour members, ordinary card-carrying members who've been loyal to Jeremy Corbyn, will stay that way. And that means that at Westminster, among the MPs, the idea of a challenge to Jeremy Corbyn's leadership by the strong hardline dissidents, that has been put on hold. 2 Labour MPs, senior ones, I know were ready and willing to go for it, to declare themselves candidates in a leadership contest. And a senior member of the shadow cabinet was prepared to join in the contest when it started. Now, Jeremy Corbyn has won extra time. There's a party plan, by the way, Fiona, for Sadiq Khan, a victory party, and Jeremy Corbyn has actually been invited. Maybe now that he's got his victory, he doesn't need to be too sensitive about who he's seen with, but you won't see them together anyway, because the victory party is taking place at a secret location.
John Pienaar, thanks very much. Well, in Wales, Labour is likely to continue governing on its own, even though it fell just short of an overall majority in the Welsh Assembly. Labour are on 29, Plaid Cymru on 12, the Conservatives 11. And for the first time, UKIP won 7 seats. Our Wales correspondent, Howell Griffith, is outside the Assembly building in Cardiff Bay for us now. And Howell, some comfort for Labour, but UKIP will be the ones who are celebrating.
Yes, UKIP have been called many things during this election campaign. Outsiders, insurgents, new kids on the block. Tonight we can add a new name, elected officials. And all the trappings that brings will give them a proper power base in Wales ahead of the EU referendum. They, of course, add to the opposition against the biggest party here, Labour, who, after a difficult night, have come through, but face new challenges in the 5 years ahead. A new day but no new dawn. For a fifth term in a row, Labour is the National Assembly's largest party. Its once firm grip of Wales has been loosened. Its share of the vote is down, rousing the party, proving a headache too.
I do wish some of the politicians in London would remember that there's an election in Wales and an election in Scotland. And I made my views very clear last week as to what I thought of it. I don't think it affected the result. If I'm honest with you, but certainly on occasion people were raising it with us and it was certainly unhelpful.
The results did bring a change in the landscape. In the Rhondda, a Labour heartland, Plaid Cymru secured their one big win. UKIP, the party promising to break the cosy consensus of Welsh politics, now have Assembly members too. So why are voters changing their allegiance?
First time ever I voted Plaid Cymru. I've always been Labour. I just don't think they're doing anything to help the communities.
As for UKIP, it's on everybody's lips, isn't it? It's immigration. And that's why. And people want jobs for Welsh people.
One person out of a job is the Welsh Lib Dem leader, Kirsty Williams, who resigned after she became the party's only Assembly member. The shape of the opposition parties in Wales helps Labour.
We have the opposition to Labour, the non-Labour parties spread, and so whilst they make some challenges to Labour, they can't capture those constituency seats.
Labour must now decide how to negotiate the next 5 years and try to hold its ground. Hywel Griffith, BBC News.
In Northern Ireland, results have been coming in, though the final outcome isn't expected until tomorrow. Let's talk to our Ireland correspondent Chris Buckley, who's at account in Belfast. Chris, what sense can you get of the way the vote is going now?
Well, with over half the seats now filled at Stormont, it's clear that today marks a very good day for the Democratic Unionist Party. Its leader, Arlene Foster, arrived here a short time ago, and she said she was elated by the scale of what is really a victory for them, and she will now be returned to Stormont as First Minister. It's also been a pretty good election for Sinn Féin, although they have faced some challenges, not least in their traditional heartland of West Belfast, where they lost a seat to the People Before Profit Alliance. That's an anti-austerity grouping which actually topped the poll there. But as a whole, whenever we look at the new Stormont, it is clear that it's going to be dominated once again by the Democratic Unionist Party and Sinn Féin. And that's at the expense of the Ulster Unionists and the SDLP, the other main unionist and nationalist parties.
Chris Buckley in Belfast, thank you. Well, let's go back to our political editor, Laura Kuenssberg, who's at Westminster for us tonight. Laura, what message do you think the voters are trying to send to the parties with these results, and where does it leave the parties tonight?
Well, Fiona, when the rosettes have been packed away and the party's balloons from their celebrations have shrivelled down to nothing, what are we really left with in a set of elections where not much power actually really changed hands? Well, there are still two dramatic lessons from Scotland for the big parties in particularly. For Labour, a very serious setback there, worrying for the party right round the UK, not just because they need Labour votes if they've a hope of winning at a general election, but also because even though the campaign wasn't run by Jeremy Corbyn, it adopted the kind of ideas that are more comfortable to his kinds of politics. The party tacked left, and voters in Scotland roundly rejected it, and that's got to be a concern for Labour right round the UK. But a lesson too for the Conservatives, perhaps, if they're willing to listen. Their fresh-faced, modern, daredevil candidate Ruth Davidson pulled off something quite unachievable a few months ago in Scotland, where in contrast, an old-fashioned, nastier campaign in London looks like it has actually lost City Hall, and that's been won by Labour instead. That is a lesson, the contrast between the modern face of the Tory party and more old-fashioned campaigning that some people in the party are already pointing to. Generally, though, the Conservatives slipped rather than fell away. They don't really have anything they think they need to panic about. For Labour, though, even though Jeremy Corbyn's team are pleased with these results, they feel that the immediate threat to his leadership has abated.
The fundamental anxiety in many parts of the party about him is still there. And it's this, the same anxiety that was there from the day in which he won the election. Can he show that he can reach out to voters in the middle, beyond the party's base, the party's members and those who'd always choose to vote for the party? He's not so far been able to answer that question, and that is a significant concern that won't disappear in the weeks and months to come. A big health warning: these elections are intriguing and important, but they don't translate directly into the next general election. Nonetheless, they are important clues and signals of what might lie ahead for all of our political parties.
Laura Kuenssberg in Westminster, thank you. And there's lots more detail and analysis on our website, and details of the elections for police and crime commissioners. The address is there for you, bbc.co.uk/news. The government has made a U-turn on its controversial plans to force all schools in England to become academies. After strong opposition from teaching unions, councils and some Conservative MPs, the Education Secretary Nicky Morgan now says the proposal is only an aspiration. It's the latest in a series of government policy climb-downs. Our education editor Branwen Jeffries broke the story.
In the middle of the North Yorkshire moors, a village school here for more than 100 years. Now just 9 pupils, it feared being forced to become an academy.
That's my dad there.
It was schools like this that galvanised a Tory revolt. Today the Education Secretary gave way.
Where schools are good and outstanding, they can make the choice to convert. I hope that they will, because we are convinced that becoming academies does lift standards, but they can do the right thing for them.
So what does this academies climb down mean? Good schools will not be forced to become academies, a U-turn on the government plans. But schools will become academies in areas where councils are thought to underperform. And councils will have an equal say over the future of small rural schools, so they can't close without local agreement. So I asked Nicky Morgan, how badly did they miscalculate?
There is a huge appetite amongst parliamentary colleagues on the Conservative benches for schools to become academies.
But not to be forced to become academies.
Well, that's what we're saying. We don't think it's necessary for there to be a blanket provision for schools to convert to become academies.
You've put forward these plans, you've defended them. Doesn't this undermine your own authority as Education Secretary?
No, I think all government has to be about listening to members of Parliament, as Secretary of State for Education, listening to the profession, listening to those working in education.
George Osborne put these plans at the centre of his budget.
We're going to complete the task of setting schools free from local education bureaucracy, and we're going to do it in this Parliament.
A flagship policy and a massive climb down on a busy day of election results.
This is a bad policy which nobody wanted and nobody needed, but there's no question it is a major U-turn and a humiliating one for the government. But I'm pleased that schools can now concentrate on what is really important.
The lesson for the government: don't take your own MPs for granted. They're behind the drastic rewriting of these draft plans.
It allows for proper discussion, proper debate. It allows some of the problems to be found before you end up with legislation in front of Parliament. So I really welcome the process that we've gone through. It's going to help us to get to the right place and the best piece of legislation.
Scratch the surface and the end result may still be many more academies, but good schools will be coaxed, not pushed, to make the change. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News.
In Canada, some of the 90,000 people forced by raging wildfires to abandon an entire city in the province of Alberta are having to be evacuated again as they find themselves once more endangered by the flames burning out of control. Some had been making the risky journey in convoys of cars. Others are having to be airlifted to safety. Our correspondent James Cook reports from Alberta.
It is mid-afternoon on a bright, sunny Tuesday. But darkness has descended on Fort McMurray and 80,000 people are fleeing for their lives. Behind, on the left of screen, animals run from the forest. Those are burning embers flying through the air. And people further on are being chased by the monster fire.
No houses, no cars.
And this is what it left behind. The view from inside the ruined city. Police now say a handful of people may have stayed here and survived. 3 days on, the fires are still raging out of control. Thousands of people trapped near the city were driven or flown to safety this morning, but police say flames up to 200 feet high on both sides of the road have forced them to suspend the convoy. And they're also worried about the risk of an explosion at a nearby oil facility.
With the amount of material there, you're looking at about a 14-kilometer blast radius, so I mean it's a pretty substantial area.
For some families, sheltering 5 hours to the south, unsure whether or not their homes have survived, the wait for news is grim. Around 150 helicopters are still fighting this fire. The challenge for the pilots and more than 1,000 firefighters on the ground is clear from the air. The extent of this wildfire is breathtaking. And the power of the fire is truly awesome. Just look at it.
Well, this is what the firefighters are having to deal with. This has just erupted in the last 15 or 20 minutes. It's taken hold very, very quickly, and the flames are being fanned by very strong winds.
As if that wasn't bad enough, temperatures tomorrow are forecast to soar. James Cook, BBC News, near Fort McMurray in Alberta.
The BBC has learned that 8 police forces, including Greater Manchester Police, are investigating election expenses for some Conservative MPs during last year's general election. The allegations centre on hotel costs for party activists bussed in to help in marginal constituencies. Filing incorrect election expenses is a criminal offence. North Korea, one of the world's most secretive and authoritarian states, is holding a rare Workers' Party Congress. The event, the country's most powerful political gathering involving more than 3,000 delegates, hasn't happened since 1980. Our correspondent John Sudworth is one of a group of foreign journalists invited in to witness the occasion. He's operating under heavy surveillance and control in Pyongyang.
It's the kind of welcome you'd expect for the leader of the world's most isolated, totalitarian state. But Kim Jong-un is young and just 4 years into the job, and he may not yet be totally secure in his position.
In this year of the 7th Party Congress, the military and the people have accomplished great success in the first hydrogen bomb test and the launch of an Earth observation satellite.
But away from the conference, our government minders have been keen to show off a different side of Pyongyang. Today, the city has more shops. Commerce, once a rare sight in this rigid socialist system, appears to be flourishing. And here's something else they're keen to show off, and something you don't normally associate with North Korea: a football training academy, the brainchild, we're told, of the country's leader, Kim Jong-un. Our guides hope it shows a modern, dynamic, outward-looking North Korea. And yet it also highlights a massive problem. The development of the academy, like the rest of the economy, has been badly hit by sanctions. Some people would say that if North Korea stopped its nuclear program and its nuclear ambitions, the sanctions would be lifted.
A wolf is just looking at you in front of you. He wants to eat you with nuclear weapon. And what do I do? Do I have to put down the gun and wait with nothing in my hand for the wolf to come and eat me?
There may be hints of economic reform, but in North Korea, everything comes back to regime survival. The real purpose of this Workers' Party Congress is consolidating this man's hold on power. John Sudworth, BBC News, Pyongyang.
It's the deepest place on Earth, around 7 miles beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean. Now, scientists from America's Oceans Research Agency are getting a rare glimpse of just what inhabits the depths of the Mariana Trench. And the video taken by remote submersibles is being broadcast live on social media. Our science editor, David Shukman, has been taking a look.
An alien world being explored right now by robot submarine.
Yeah, that's tough to track him.
one of the strangest and most spectacular sights, a luminous jellyfish pulsing its way through the Mariana Trench, the darkest, deepest waters anywhere on the planet. Scientists up on the surface are amazed.
So beautiful.
A sea cucumber, luridly coloured, twisting in light it's never seen before. An image that wasn't only filmed, but was also relayed live. The revelations can be watched by anyone with access to the internet. It's part of a new age of exploration, with marine researchers on board the expedition ship, sharing their discoveries with scientists around the world.
Well, the deep sea, it really is a place of wonder and beauty, and quite often yes, we'll have the chance to go through and make sense of it as scientists later. But the colours, the delicate life forms down there, it's just astounding the sort of intricate wonders that nature can produce.
I think it's a sponge. No, it is trash.
But some of the discoveries are depressing. There's litter even in the abyss. Rubbish that's drifted down through several miles to the ocean floor. It's a new threat to the creatures here. They've already had to adapt to the extremes of pressure. This is what's known as a ghost shark. It's always said that we know more about the moon than the deepest oceans. This expedition and others that'll follow are changing that. David Shrookman, BBC News.
Fascinating. That's all from us now on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.